The rain fell in thick, unbroken sheets that evening, turning Lahore's dusty streets into a maze of shimmering puddles. I was driving home from work, weary and ready for silence, when I spotted her again, sitting alone on the narrow bench by the corner tea stall. She wore the same faded shawl she always did, wrapped tightly around her shoulders like armor. Her eyes, hidden beneath the curtain of wet hair, stared into nothing. I'd seen her there before, often at dusk, always alone, always still. She never begged, never spoke, and never seemed to be waiting for anyone. Just existing quietly as the world moved around her. On impulse, I pulled over. "Need a ride?" I asked, lowering the window halfway. The wipers beat a rhythm of hesitation. She looked up, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might walk away. Then, without a word, she opened the door and slipped inside. The car filled, with the scent of damp earth and something floral, faint, like perfume that had long since faded. She didn't speak, only gave brief directions to a small housing colony I'd never heard of. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was thick, deliberate, like we were both used to it. I dropped her near a narrow alleyway. She mumbled a quick, "Thank you," and vanished into the shadows before I could respond. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The next time I saw her, I was prepared. I brought 2 cups of chai and pretended to stumble upon her spot casually. "I figured you might still like your tea hot," I said, holding one out. She blinked, clearly surprised, then took it without a word. We sat in silence again, but this time it felt different, less heavy, more curious. "I'm Rafiq," I offered. She hesitated. "Saba." A name, a beginning. Over the next week, our evening teas became routine. She never volunteered much, but I learned she lived with a cousin, worked odd cleaning jobs, and had once been engaged. When I asked why it ended, she simply said, "Some stories aren't worth retelling." There was something about her detachment that drew me in. It wasn't indifference, it was survival. A quiet resilience masked behind calm eyes and practiced silence. One evening, as we sat on the bench and the sky dimmed to a bruised purple, I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Why do you sit here every night, Saba, alone? In the same place?" She didn't look at me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because home doesn't feel safe anymore." The words hung between us, sharp and final. I didn't push further, but something shifted in that moment. Whatever she had kept guarded behind those silent evenings had just begun to crack open. And I knew. This was no ordinary connection. This was the beginning of something delicate, dangerous, and deeply real. Saba began showing up earlier at the tea stall. Sometimes she even waited with 2 cups in hand, one always for me. Her guarded expression softened over time, though her eyes still carried a kind of weariness I couldn't touch. I never asked too many questions. I sensed her past was stitched with wounds that hadn't yet scarred. One evening, as we sat watching the sun bleed into the city skyline, she spoke without warning. "I was supposed to be married last year," she said. Her voice was level, as if reciting someone else's story. "He was older, rich, and liked to control everything, including me." I listened in silence. He'd call 10 times a day, question everything I wore. I thought it was love. It wasn't. I wanted to say something, anything, but nothing felt right. Her pain didn't need my pity, just presence. As weeks passed, we moved beyond the tea stall. Sometimes we walked along the canal road or shared food at my apartment. She never stayed long, always leaving before nightfall. I didn't ask her to stay. I didn't want to chase her away. But there was a moment, quiet and unexpected, when the boundaries blurred. It was raining again. She stood near the window in my living room, soaked and shivering, refusing my offer of a towel. "Why do you always try to fix me, Rafiq?" she asked, her voice a mix of anger and confusion. "I'm not trying to fix you," I replied gently. "I just care." She turned sharply. "Men say that. They always say that. But it always leads to the same place." Then she stepped back as if bracing for something. I reached out, not to touch, but to calm. "I'm not him," I said, meaning it. She scoffed, turning her back to me. I didn't understand her sudden shift until I remembered the prescription she'd mentioned earlier, something she needed for her migraines. Without thinking, I reached into my wallet to pull out some money. She turned at the sound of the zipper, eyes flicking toward the notes in my hand. For a second, the room froze. Then, like a switch had been flipped, her tone changed. She stepped forward, softer now. "I didn't mean to raise my voice," she murmured, lowering her eyes. I've been through a lot." She took the money without resistance, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her purse. That night, she stayed. But as I sat beside her later, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time, a strange unease settled in me. It wasn't about the moment. It was about the shift. Her anger had vanished the instant she saw money. I told myself it was just gratitude, a coping mechanism, a moment of trust. But deep down, something else whispered. Was it me she trusted, or my wallet? After that night, our dynamic changed. Saba started visiting more often, sometimes unannounced, always perfectly timed. She brought sweetness in her laughter, a newfound ease in her presence. At first, I convinced myself that she was just learning to trust again, that the walls she had so carefully built were finally beginning to fall. But subtle shifts began to creep in. She began asking for small things, nothing outrageous. A new dress for a cousin's wedding, help covering her rent, money for groceries. Each request wrapped in soft glances and careful words, never demanding, always justified. And each time I obliged, I didn't mind. Or so I told myself. Still, something gnawed at the back of my mind. One evening, I decided to surprise her. I drove to the housing colony she had once described, parked discreetly near the alley where she always disappeared. I waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Just as I was about to leave, I saw her. Not alone. Laughing openly with a man I didn't recognize. He handed her something, and she smiled in a way I had never seen with me. Not once. A different Saba. A version untouched by sadness or caution. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. The sight had already carved a hollow inside me. The next day, I asked casually, "So, what did you do last night?" She didn't flinch. Stayed in. Headache. Her lie was clean. Practiced. But now I began to see her more clearly, how her presence shifted with need, how she mirrored the emotions I projected. She was attentive when I was generous, distant when I wasn't. Her affection was like a dial, turned up or down depending on the moment. Yet, I couldn't walk away. A part of me still believed the broken woman I met at the tea stall was real. That beneath the layers, she had simply learned to survive in a world that hadn't been kind. Maybe I was just another lifeline to her, but I didn't want to believe that. Later that week, I gave her an envelope. Not money, just a note. It read, "Do you care for me, or just what I can offer?" She read it without emotion. Folded, and said nothing. That night, she didn't stay. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message. From her. Just 4 words. "Don't make it difficult." I stared at the screen for a long time. It was then I realized. Our connection had never been what I thought it was. I had mistaken vulnerability for love, and convenience for intimacy. She hadn't betrayed me with rage or violence. She'd done it with silence. And silence, I was learning, can be the loudest kind of betrayal. I didn't hear from Saba for days after that message. No calls, no visits, no explanation. Just silence. Crisp and final. At first, I told myself it was over, that I could move on. But my thoughts kept circling back to her, the way she looked out the window during storms, the way she never fully smiled, and how she made pain look poetic. Even if she had used me, even if the love had been laced with deception, my feelings had been real. One evening, I returned to the bench by the tea stall. It was empty. The corner felt abandoned, like even the air had stopped waiting for her. The tea vendor, a quiet man with sharp eyes, approached me after a while. "You looking for that girl?" he asked, nodding toward the bench. I hesitated. "Saba?" He frowned. "That's not her real name." "What do you mean?" "She sits here sometimes with different men, changes her story every few weeks. You're not the first, brother. Won't be the last." His words landed like stones. I thanked him and left, my thoughts loud in the quiet drive home. I had spent weeks believing in a version of Saba that may have never existed. Maybe she was broken, or maybe she was simply playing a part. Maybe both. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter I would never send. "You once said some stories weren't worth retelling, but I think ours is, because it taught me what love isn't. It isn't a transaction. It isn't silence when truth is needed. And it's not found in the shadows of half-truths and survival. I don't hate you, Saba, but I can't love a ghost." The next morning, I deleted her number. Not out of anger, out of finality. Weeks passed. Life resumed its steady rhythm. The pain dulled. But every now and then, I'd pass someone in a shawl on a rainy street and wonder if it was her. I'd remember the softness in her voice, the storm in her silence. But I never stopped again. I had learned. Some people aren't meant to stay. They enter like whispers, change the way you breathe, then vanish, leaving only echoes behind. And that's what she became. Not a villain, not a victim, just an echo of a story that wasn't built to last. In the end, the betrayal wasn't about money or lies. It was about how deeply I had let someone in without ever truly knowing who they were. But I know who I am now. And that finally is enough.